I'm Sadie Everett, and I am the director of the Regional Autism Advisory Council, or RAC, which is now part of the IDD Education Center at the University of Cincinnati. And this is, I think, our fourth or fifth virtual training that we launched here, this RAC training series this fall. And we've really tried to focus on topics that that can help us support mental health and well-being. And we have the honor of having Amie Duncan, Dr. Amie Duncan, here today to tell us all about executive function and well-being. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Amie to get started. And yeah, let's rock it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm excited to be here with all of you. Just get this set up. And just really sort of quick about me and why I'm excited to talk about this topic with you all is, so I'm a clinical psychologist at Cincinnati Children's and primarily work with autistic children and adolescents, primarily adolescents, and really with the goal of helping them make a successful transition from high school to the adult world, and primarily do research on developing and testing out interventions. So one hat I wear is a daily living skills intervention. And then we also are working with middle schoolers who have a diagnosis with autism on building executive functioning skills, really specific to school. And so if anyone has questions, happy to chat offline about that. My email will be at the end. But I was telling Sadie before all of you got on, I love this topic. I think when we were in the planning stages, we were like, man, like tackling executive functioning challenges really increases well-being for everyone. And so I want us to kind of all maybe be thinking about that, and I'll prompt us as we go along. But hopefully this is a really practical talk, not only for any patients or children or students you may be working with who have autism and EF challenges. But I always say, like, I practice what I preach. Like, some of these strategies that we're going to be talking about, I use for myself, for my kids, because I think that really helps you build a system that works for you and helps as you're kind of problem solving, working with others. So let me jump right into it. What I will say is feel free to put questions or things in the chat, and happy to address those at the end as time allows, and you can always reach out by email. Okay, so I thought we could just start by kind of getting in the mindset that I want you to think about all of the things you do as adults to have a day that goes smoothly, right? So all the adulting things, right? And this is just sort of a checklist that, might help you think of some of the big and small things that you do, right? And so I want you to also think about a day that you had where things did not go smoothly. Okay, so maybe you woke up late, something unexpected happened, maybe you forgot your laptop charger. If you're like me, you spill coffee on your shirt multiple days a week as you're getting out the door. Maybe you didn't have time to prep. You didn't wake up early enough to prep for a meeting or something you needed to do. Or maybe you got a phone call that was important and you had to juggle other things as a result. Okay. And so thinking about that day, like, what was your state of mind? Were you frazzled? Were you stressed? Were you overwhelmed? And thinking about that day, how did that feeling maybe carry across the rest of your day? Did you, get irritated with someone? Did you snap? Did you get a headache? Did your stomach feel cramped, right? Like, that's probably things that a lot of us have felt during crazy days. And as adults, we're not perfect, right? We often mess up, but most of us have some systems that we put in place that work for us and help us do all these adulting things we need to do. And those systems, those strategies, right, they impact our well-being, right? If you've got a system for getting up and getting ready in the morning, or packing your lunch for work, or, getting your kids out the door, if that goes well and that system works for you, then your day is going to be better. You're going to get up, you're going to feel better, you'll feel more prepared for the day. And we know, this is intuitive, I know you guys know this, when we're less stressed, we have better emotion regulation. We're able to be flexible. We're able to roll with the changes when we've implemented the strategies that allow us to be good planners, good prioritizers, and manage our time effectively, right? And so in other words, when we're doing the things that allow us to have really good EF, we do have better well-being. We're in a better state of mind and emotion. And so, as I said, really today's talk, what I want to go into is how executive functioning, or EF for short, how that may affect autistic children and teens on a daily basis, both at school and at home, and maybe think through some strategies that can tackle these challenges in those environments. And being mindful that tackling these challenges, it is work, right? Like it takes time, it takes energy, it takes commitment, but it can have a profound impact both on the child and the family, and oftentimes at school as well. So for example, if a child can become more independent in managing the materials they need for homework, getting their planner out, figuring out what they need to do, getting started, that leads to them feeling more capable, more independent. And then at the same time, the parents will often report, like, I feel better as a parent. Like, I implemented a strategy that worked, but the parent also gets more free time, right? If your child's doing that independently, you're not right there helping them, maybe like more help, less help. You can do other things. Not saying you're not checking in sometimes. You may still need to do that, but it gives you more time and space to do other things. That's huge. That leads to parent well-being. And a lot of the interventions that we've done with families, that's this like beautiful side effect of teaching the children and the teens how to do things, is that families are like, this actually increased my emotional well-being. Like, it was time, we had to put the work in, but our lives are smoother now. Not every day, but most days. And I think that's the goal. Okay. All right. So want to just hit, when we're talking about executive functioning challenge, what does that mean? There are lots of different ways to group them. I like this grouping because I think mostly what I'm going to be talking about today falls under this blue part of the umbrella, the academic management. So, being organized, managing time, planning, being able to kind of start a task, stick with the task, and finish a task, which is kind of those last three things fall into. The social emotional parts of EF are really important too. And that's just, kind of another talk. And we've got another rack talk coming up that will actually talk a lot about like emotional regulation and flexibility. So that's coming, but I'm going to primarily talk about the blue ones. What we know is that, anywhere from about 40 to 80% of autistic children, teens, and adults have executive functioning challenges. And so they're very common. They may not have all of them. They may, kind of have a strengths challenges profile, but they are likely to have some pretty significant challenges in at least one of these areas. And so we're going to talk more about that. And so what we know about what EF looks like in autistic individuals is that typically challenges increase with age. Makes sense, is your environment at school, at home becomes more, challenging and expectations rise. That can be more difficult if you've got issues around things like planning and managing materials and monitoring how you're doing with getting your homework done, how long it's taking you to finish a worksheet or write an essay. The other piece we know is that executive functioning is related to adaptive behavior. So adaptive behavior encompasses social skills, communication skills, and daily living skills. And so if you have challenges in things like shifting your attention or planning a task, that is going to affect your ability to have a conversation with someone, to get your chores done, to follow multi-step directions, right? So executive functioning challenges really have a lot of downstream effects on other areas. The other thing that we know is that executive functioning is linked to both short-term and long-term outcomes. So having some strategies and supports to compensate for EF challenges leads to better academic functioning, better daily living skills at home. So, cooking, cleaning, laundry, hygiene, better quality of life, both as, a child, teen, but also adult. And then more independence. If you're able to do more things, to take care of yourself, to manage your time, to do all those adulting things, you are more likely to be able to sort of meet your goals related to independence in adulthood, whether that's working, whether that's going to college, whether that's living on your own or semi-independently. So it is an important area to kind of consider and think through. Okay. So I want to dive a little deeper and just sort of get you guys thinking and about this, about how EF challenges may impact autistic children and teens. And so we're going to go through some different areas. And I just want you to first be thinking about, maybe it's, someone you're working with, maybe it's someone at home, an EF challenge that maybe could have an impact on your child or teen's well-being or the family's well-being if you tackled it. Okay. And we're going to go through some. So if you don't have one right off the top of your head, sometimes families come in, like I will say, the families I work with, the biggest pressure point at home is waking up to getting out the door, right? And if you think about that, there's so many executive functioning things that happen: planning, time management, prioritizing, right? So maybe it's that, but maybe it's something else. Maybe it's the homework routine. Maybe it's something at school. So think about that. And we're going to go through these EFs, and then that, if not, you'll probably have one that comes to mind. But I'd love for us, I would love for you guys to interact during this part of this presentation using the chat, and to just maybe think about, when you think about planning, right? Planning for a task, planning, to do something. What are some examples of planning that a child or teen may need to do throughout the day? And feel free to just put them in the chat. One example I just gave is getting ready in the morning, right? So that requires a lot of planning. What might be some other things that all of you see on a regular basis? Yeah, steps for showering. That's a great one. Say the homework rhythm after school, what needs to be done coming home. Yeah, bedtime, homework, getting dressed. Absolutely. Getting ready for like any extracurricular activities, right? If you've got a sport or a music lesson, what do you need to bring? When do you need to leave? All those sorts of things. Figuring out the best time to wake up. Yep, these are great. Another one families often bring up is planning out one's time when you get home. Like, when do you do homework versus chores versus leisure versus things like showering or getting ready for bed, right? That's a lot of planning, a lot of higher order sort of EF things. Okay, so those are great. Another EF I want you guys to think about related to planning is prioritizing. So similarly, in the chat, what are some examples of EF skills that might be at school or at home or in the community that require like a level of prioritizing? Yep. Yeah, initiative. We're going to get there, Sadie. That's a good point, right? Initiative to do chores without being asked. That's a biggie. Prioritizing with, self-care with meals. That's a good point. Like, I'm guessing like when to eat meals and what to eat, right? And maybe nutrition is a piece of that too. One thing that families bring up a lot is prioritizing like homework over video games, right? Or maybe you get a little bit of screen time when you get home, but then you've got to flip to homework, and then you can kind of that carrot, like Sadie had that question at the beginning, is video games after homework is done, right? Things like a lot of families talk about building on self-care, like, when do you need to take a shower during the evening? And is this a shower day? Is every day a shower day, or is it every other day? This comes up a lot with school. Like, if you've got a test or a quiz coming up, when do you prioritize starting studying? Yeah, wants versus need. I love that. Preferred activities versus necessary. With our middle schoolers, we often talk about them like want to do versus have to do, right? And how do you kind of, what falls in each of those buckets? It might change a little bit every day, but absolutely. And sometimes it's just like using your time well. When do you, if you are going to have some leisure time, when do you need to switch over? And what tasks will you prioritize? So planning and prioritizing often go really hand in hand. If you plan something, you prioritize it. A lot of us probably make to-do lists, and that helps us figure out, okay, what needs to be done now versus maybe what do I have, can do later in the day or later this week. Okay. Another biggie is time management. Often goes a little bit hand in hand with planning and prioritizing. But feel free to put things in the chat, maybe related to time management that might come up for your patients or students. Again, this comes up a lot on the weekends sometimes for families, like with having so much free time. How do you build in, yes, leisure for sure. Yeah, so yep, video games is often the default or screen time of some sort. And like, what are the other things to do? Or what can become sort of those, you have to do them at some point, and it can be maybe any time, but when are you going to do your chores versus self-care versus if you have homework versus screen time? And thinking about how that might fit with what the family's doing that day, if they have somewhere to go or, a birthday party, that kind of thing. And this is a little bit of a pressure point during the weeks, right? If homework is a piece of this, how do you manage giving some downtime, but also getting things done? Okay, so that's often one families bring up a lot. Okay. Organizing, little bit different. So feel free to put in the chat things related to organizing materials, organizing oneself. Yes, yeah, inflexibility sometimes comes with some of these EFs too. And that in itself is an EF, and some of these kind of hang together, right? Or one might exacerbate another. Yep, so struggling with knowing how long things take. That's true, right? Yep. So that is an important point. It is sometimes hard to know how long tasks will take, or someone might say, I think this should take you an hour, and maybe it ends up taking you 2 or 3 hours, right? And why might that be? And kind of knowing that about yourself or being able to communicate that, right? And so some of these things are also related to the, self-advocacy in some ways too. And in a way, learning about your EF challenges helps you maybe figure out, what do I need to ask for support for? What do I need to communicate? What do I need to ask questions about? So these are great things in the chat. We could just probably sit and talk about all these things in the chat, right? With organizing, if we're thinking about organizing materials, right? Like a lot of times parents say, I just wish he could keep his room clean, right? And so, but that is a big task if you think about it. If someone said, go clean your room, we could probably break that down into like 20 to 50 individual steps, right? The trash, putting the Legos away, maybe organizing the video games. Are there plates in there? Are there cups, right? So that can be a lot, but organizing the bedroom, organizing a backpack, right? That may be like a dead zone that things just go and you never see them again. Organizing school materials, but also organizing things like, how do you organize your self-care products so that when you wake up in the morning, you see what you need to use? Do you have to brush your teeth? Do you have to use face wash or clean your glasses, whatever it might be? Yeah, keeping a desk organized. That's a great one. That can be really challenging too, and you often don't have maybe the dedicated time to do that. So figuring out a system for that. And having multiple tasks at school or assignments, that can be tricky to juggle in terms of planning, prioritizing as well. So these are all good things. Another one that this is obviously encompasses a lot is and this is really 3 EFs in one, but it's starting a task. So how do you know when to start? How do you get the motivation to start? And how do you make sure that once you get there, you're going to be able to start? You might have a great homework space at home for the child or teen to use, but how do you get them there and actually get started on homework, right? Or you might have a great chore chart, but how do you get them started on doing the chores? And so we'll talk about some ideas for that. Sticking with a task or persevering. So once you do get started, how do you keep going? How long should you keep going? And what are maybe some things that maybe some environmental pieces that you can modify to make it more likely? We'll talk through that. And then also finishing a task. How do you know when you're finished? I think it was Courtney in the chat who mentioned, like, sometimes it does take longer, right? And so, what if you thought a task was going to take 30 minutes and now it's 2 hours? How does that affect your ability to finish? What might that look like? There's where some of that flexibility comes in, that might be tricky, right? And we might need some supports and strategies in place. Okay. And then last one that I wanted to just think through is shifting attention or focus. This is maybe one that I think is a really important one that we might, as parents or teachers or individuals, even with ourselves, might not even think about. In that, I think the most salient example is when someone comes home from school or work even, and maybe they have things that they need to do. That can be hard to like shift a focus and attention and energy on a different task, right? And so that's where it's sort of knowing the person, do they need a little bit of a break? Do they need a reminder? Do they need a visual support? Like, these are the things we'll talk about here shortly to help them figure out the best way for them to kind of shift attention and focus. Okay. Let's see, I want to make sure I mention, this related to kind of at home. I think maybe it's easy to think about school, especially if you're switching classes or switching between teachers. That can be tricky for many, but this relates to sort of multitasking. Like, I think a lot of us, if we're cooking in the kitchen, we might be simultaneously cleaning up the counter or putting things in the dishwasher or putting things away. That might not be something that, if you're working on having your team do that they're thinking about, right? The other example I like to point out is switching to a new strategy when the first approach was not effective, right? And so I work with a lot of teens who their go-to is technology, like using an app, using something on their phone or on the iPad. And oftentimes that's actually not the most effective thing for maybe like starting chores or knowing what you need to do in the morning or after school. And it might be that, they need someone to say, you know what, we tried it. We have to shift. Like, we need to try a whiteboard, or we just need an old-fashioned paper and pen list that's posted on the fridge or posted in your room right above your desk at home or wherever you do your homework, right? So that can be something to kind of work on as well. Okay. So in summary, we just really talked about some of the EF challenges that a lot of children and teens who have autism, but also, just in general, whether you're neurodivergent, whether, you're quote unquote neurotypical, that how these may impact you across different environments. So again, I want you to maybe think about for a second an EF challenge that you might want to tackle for yourself, for a patient, for a student, whatever it might be. You can put it in the chat. You can just maybe, keep it to yourself if you prefer. And we're going to go through sort of some strategies and some thinking around how you might tackle this. And how even just maybe some small things in place can really impact how you target an executive functioning challenge. And again, I can't emphasize that I think that doing this really leads to the individual feeling more capable and more confident about themselves. A lot of times working with middle schoolers and high schoolers, they are often continually struggling to remember things, to do things. That doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't feel good to struggle. It also doesn't feel good for maybe a very well-meaning teacher or caregiver, parent who's reminding them, prompting them, the teens would maybe say nagging them. This really impacts their ability to feel independent and autonomous in managing their own challenges and what works for them. And that goes a long way towards well-being. Similarly, parents and teachers who are maybe feeling like they are a child's executive functioning. That's a quote like a lot of parents and teachers will often say, like, I am their executive functioning sometimes. That's a lot to hold. That's stress, that's overwhelm, that could be frustration. It's a lot of time and energy, and releasing some of that, it might take time, it might be slow, that can have some big effects. So hopefully made that point. Okay. I want to make sure we get to the strategy. So I'm going to go through some of this quickly, but hopefully it's helpful. When this is sort of a framework we take when I'm helping families and autistic teens work on building their life skills at home. I am a huge fan of the book Atomic Habits. It's a great book about setting goals, reaching goals, changing your behavior, how to do it, how to make it easy for you based on who you are, what your strengths and challenges are. And my favorite quote is that you fall to the level of your systems. You can set as many goals as you want. Think about all of us who maybe set goals at the beginning of the school year, New Year's, right? You can set 100 goals, but if you don't have a system in place for how you're going to reach them, you will not reach your goals, right? I tell our teens, our goal is for you to not have clean laundry for one day on the session that we work on it. You need to have clean laundry for your whole life. So we need to build the system so that you can do that independently, right? And so when we're tackling EF challenges, it's really helpful to think about the following factors. So the individual, the caregiver or teacher, whoever is working with the individual, use of evidence-based strategies. I'm not going to go over the 4 laws of behavior change. This is in the book, but it's basically how do you make sure that your goals are specific, are rewarding, are attractive, these things that we know will help you reach your goals. And that's covered a lot in Atomic Habits, but also if you're familiar with sort of just behavior change and goals, a key piece of that. Okay, so some initial points. It is really important to identify the challenges that are most critical to tackle. If you identify too many at once or you're targeting too many at once, that can be challenging. I always say, like, let's start with 1, maybe 2, and maybe they kind of overlap in some ways. And it's building the system of evidence-based strategies, knowing the individual, knowing the person who's supporting them. That's the place to start. There are, and I'm going to show you a ton of strategies that we can use to target EF challenges. And what I say is once you find one that works, it can be used again and again and again and again. And I think about the own strategies you use that you're successful for. Like, I am a big proponent. I use a paper planner. That works for me. Like, I keep my lists in there. That's where my calendar is. I won't ever move away from that. And for work, I might have to have an electronic calendar so others might know where I am. But for me, I always use that paper planner. That helps me because I need to write it down. I need to see it with my eyes. I need to process it like with my hand as I write it. And then, ideally, any strategies that are taught, they're practiced in the environment that are used most often. And so this is just really important. It's making sure that we're not teaching something where it then has to be generalized to a new place where things might look different, or just being very mindful of that. So ideally, teaching where the skill will be performed. Okay. One thing that's really important to think about is the role of the individual. Okay. So what are their strengths? What are their challenges? What motivates them? Oftentimes it's maybe picking the EF challenge that the child or teen wants to work on. That builds buy-in. How do they learn best? Is it visually? Is it auditory? Do they love technology? Is that a motivation? And how could you increase their commitment and buy-in? And oftentimes that's giving choice and letting them choose as opposed to things being chosen for them. And that builds, well-being too. That's really important. The other thing that I think is really important to consider, especially in this current climate where I think a lot of people are just busy and overscheduled, and that's kind of our current culture right now, which I'm wish we could pull back, but I think it's important to really think about the person, whether it's a teacher or parent or whoever, who's supporting the individual. They need to think about their time. Can they work on this? What's their energy level? What's their stress level? How motivated are they to work on this, and how committed? It takes time to build these skills. So, working on it, you want to make sure that you can really devote the time, and being mindful of like, okay, if I want to work on building a homework system, that means every day during the week, maybe except Fridays, we've got to do that. And so that's going to take some time. Do I have that? Do I have the bandwidth for that? And if not, you might choose something else, or do something that's more manageable. Maybe it's just writing things in the planner is the first step, and you'll tackle the prioritizing later, or the getting started later. So making sure it's doable for everybody involved. We're going to talk about a ton of evidence-based strategies. There's a lot on here. We'll go through them. But that is, and like I said, once you find one that works, it's using it again and again for the individual. The other thing that we talk a lot about in our intervention sessions working on EF and also life skills is, if you're a parent, this idea that, we all have different parenting styles, and they may ebb and flow. You may have to be, there's all these negative terms out there: helicopter parent, snow plow parent, lawnmower parent. They're, kind of negative, right? There probably are moments where being that type of parent, if you sometimes use that, has served you, right? And so there's no shame in that, right? But as you're thinking about maybe targeting some of these skills, there's this new term that's popped up that I just love. There's lots of articles kind of out there in the Atlantic and other places lately about being a lighthouse parent. And that, you really want to be the home for children, that you want to provide the tools for them to figure out what they're going through, right? And so this EF can be looked at that. Like, we want you, we're going to be the guide, we're going to support you. We're not going to do your homework for you. We're not going to plan everything in your planner for you. We're going to slowly get you to the point where you're doing that on your own in an adaptive, titrated way over time, slowly. And I've kind of said all of this already, but just making the point that really EF targeting this can really have a profound impact on well-being. And we see it again and again in the interventions we do with families, that it is time consuming for everybody involved to work on some of these things, but the end product is not only you're being successful in figuring out what works for you, building that system, but we're also seeing improvements in things like confidence and self-determination, problem solving. And then for the family, the parents feel better. Like, I got this. I can work on this with my child or teen, and less stress, less frustration, which goes a long way. Okay. Okay. So want to go through some evidence-based strategies that might be helpful. And this I could probably talk about this with you guys for hours, but I'm just going to kind of show you some things that are resources that could be helpful. And I think, again, go back to maybe that challenge you have in your mind of what you want to tackle. Think about the individual, think about the family and the environment, and then let's try to think about what strategies might be a good one to start with. Okay. I think the goal is, if you can leave with 1 to 2 tools today to address an EF challenge, that's the goal. And that will hopefully improve well-being as well, have an impact on that. Okay. Want to show you a couple like resources that, if you want to learn more about this, the Smart But Scattered book series is fantastic for just learning about EF challenges and different supports and strategies that might be helpful. They've got it from child all the way up through adulthood and different developmental periods. So if you Google it or Amazon it, it'll pop right up and can take a look at that. If you're interested in learning more about life skills, here are 2 resources that might be helpful. The one on the right's a little outdated in terms of the language that it's using there, but it really has some nice strategies and supports in there. The one Capable is my favorite. It just gives you kind of a big list of different skills that you might want to target, and goes through some supports and strategies as well. So just 2 resources. The other one that I mention in almost all of my talks, because I think it's fabulous and it's really thorough, There is a report put out every probably 5 years. So probably a new one's coming out soon. This one's from 2020 on evidence-based practices for children, youth, and young adults who have a diagnosis of autism. This is super busy, I know that. But what it does is it gives you a list on the left here about a bunch of evidence-based strategies. And then across the top are different areas: academic, pre-academic, cognitive, mental health. EF falls under cognitive. That's why I circled that here. And it'll show you the different evidence-based strategies across different age groups. So it's a nice reference point if you're like, gosh, I've got a 18-year-old client and I'm not quite sure what strategy would help work for. You could go and look this up and it'll give you lots of good information, for example, on technology-aided instruction and intervention. And so this is for cognitive, something that works across groups, except we don't have any evidence base for, young adults. So just some resources that I thought might be helpful. Okay, so I want to go through the evidence-based strategies that could be really beneficial for targeting some EF challenges. And we'll try to have maybe a little bit of time at the end for questions. So like I said, I'll go through some of these somewhat quickly, but give you an idea of how you might use them. I'm starting with task analysis. This is probably one of my favorite strategies. It's one we use again and again in our interventions with children and adolescents, in that this is just meant to be a tool that you take a skill. If we stick with the idea of like morning routine, getting ready in the morning, or rhythm. I actually like the word rhythm because I think it is a rhythm. We get into our rhythm and then you will change it over time and as you get older, but there's going to be similar components. You probably need to eat breakfast in the morning. You probably need to brush your teeth, right? That's always going to be part of your morning rhythm. But what can be helpful, again, if you would just tell a child, get ready in the morning, that is a lot. That's a lot of steps, right? And so a task analysis worksheet like this helps you break down the steps. And then I like for families and individuals to think about, hey, are you doing this step independently, right? A lot of teens, they're getting dressed independently, but maybe they're skipping that step of putting deodorant on. Okay. And so what could we do to become more independent? Let's start there. Do you have ideas before we maybe think about a strategy that might help? This is an example of one that we use sometimes when we're helping teens break down their morning routine. Okay, so this teen has roughly about 10 steps. You'll notice for him, some of them are combined. But then we're kind of thinking through, okay, like, what could you do to become more independent? What does that look like? And it's really important for this to be as much as possible, when it can be really child, teen, young adult led, because we want their motivation and buy-in and commitment to this. And so a lot of times parents will say, like, I know this will work for them. And it's like, okay, well, let's put that on the table, but let's see if they've got ideas first. That's important. This is an example of like using a lunchbox checklist, right? So this is something that you could use for, child or adolescents. This is something like I implemented with my own kids as they were learning this, is it's like, okay, think about what you need for your lunchbox, showing them where it is in the pantry, providing support and feedback with the goal of them eventually being able to pack their lunch on their own, which I will say for my own well-being makes my morning go smoothly. I've got 3 kids and myself packing lunches in the morning. All 3 of them are doing that on their own, which frees me up to be able to do other things. It's like, looking back, it's a huge piece of my well-being in the morning that I'm still might have to help or give an idea if they're like, oh my gosh, we have nothing to eat, even though we do, right? I might say, well, let's think, what can you have for your main thing? But I'm not doing it for them, right? Which is a big time commitment. So that can be a big thing. And a lot of our teens will start working on this too. Here's an example homework task analysis. This is, one that is a little bit more detailed, and task analyses can be really detailed or not really detailed. It kind of depends on what the individual needs. And that's why having them really involved in this process is important. The parent or teacher making the task analysis, they may miss steps that the individual needs clarification on or needs more detail on. And so they can look pretty beefy sometimes. We use task analyses a lot to help with organization skills. And so this is taken from our AIMS intervention, which is our academic EF intervention for autistic middle schoolers. And we teach them how to organize their things using a binder organization system. And this is really a task analysis, right? So we say, okay, here's what you need. Here's how you're going to make it, okay? And so we give them this task analysis. I'm just going to show you some of the evidence-based strategies we use. Then we made a video that goes along with our task analysis, right? Because a lot of times what we found is that our middle schoolers really like to learn via videos, video modeling. And then after we do that, so we've got one on binder organization system. We also talk a lot about the homework folder, which is a piece of our binder organization system that they've got a to-do side and then a completed side. The goal being this completed side, when you're done with something, you put it in there and then it's going back to school. So hopefully no lost assignments in the backpack or left at home. After we do this, we give one-on-one support and feedback as we're coaching the teen on how to put together a binder organization system, how to make this homework folder along with their parent or caregiver who's in the session as well. And so a lot of evidence-based strategies, the task analysis, video modeling, which we'll talk about, direct instruction, paired with sort of guidance and actual modeling by an adult is going to help that teen feel more capable of being able to implement this. Okay. Love it. Yeah, homework folders are huge for sure. Love that. We do something similar with the backpack. And so I'll just show this quickly as an example that we break it down. We say, okay, there's 3 big steps. When you have these, things in your backpack, you're going to act on it, you're going to file it, or you're going to trash it. And those are really the 3 buckets. They might need some support and guidance about when do you trash something? But this is that initial task analysis. And then we created a video that we walk them through what it looks like before we have the parent or caregiver walk them through how to do it. And we give, some guidance and feedback too. But in that way, the teen has really kind of learned it, watched it, and practiced it all pretty quickly together and has gotten some direct feedback. We have something similar for like organizing your computer files, which is becoming more and more important nowadays as teens are really online more and have their desktop and need folders for classes in the same way they might need a binder organization system. And we've got a video for that and kind of walk them through a system for how to do that. So that sort of task analysis and some other things. The other strategy that, you've probably seen written in different ways, but it's this idea of, really how do you teach a task? So teaching a task, like we said, go clean your bedroom. That might be a lot. That's overwhelming. But if you break teaching this task down into, okay, we're going to learn it. Maybe we create a task analysis. We read through and discuss the task analysis steps, what products you might need to clean your room, what's going well, what you might need help with. Then maybe you watch or do it with your parent. So the parent goes through the steps on the task analysis and says, okay, when I say clean up your Legos, here's what I mean. When I say pick up your clothes off the floor, here's where I want you to put them, right? So it's sort of watching and demonstrating. Then the next step would be the teen practicing that. Maybe they're only practicing a few steps. Maybe they're practicing all the steps. That's where some things like prompting or chaining, if you're familiar with those behavioral concepts of sort of direct teaching, may come into play. And the parent or caregiver might observe, give feedback, might check in, right? And then the goal is always for independence. You've got hopefully through learning, watching, and practicing, you're building up what strategies you might need so that they're then able to do it independently. Okay, this can be used for a variety of tasks, cooking, homework system, many, many things. Relatedly, what we often pair with that, when we're talking about life skills and even homework, that is not necessarily inherently motivating for a lot of us, right? Like, doing your morning rhythm and doing it well, as you're learning it is often necessary to provide some sort of reinforcement or reward. And that might be verbal and praise, but oftentimes it's got to be a little bit more to get them motivated and bought into doing it. And so, for example, with something like morning routine, we will often pair it with something like if you get your routine done at the time you're supposed to, you've got like screen time in the morning, or you get to pack an extra, favorite snack or dessert in your lunch. And so pairing that, you won't always need that reward, but until it becomes a habit and something that they're doing a lot, that is reinforcement and reward is really important and necessary. I would argue for most skills, especially things around EF. We often tie all of those things together with something like a contract, or some might call it a behavior agreement, or chore chart, whatever it might be, homework contract, that says what your goal is, what you're working on, what your reward is, and giving you an opportunity to track it. When are you doing it? And when are you supposed to be doing it? And these can look really different. We call them problem-solving plans when we're working with our middle schoolers on building executive functioning. And, what we want to do is actually help them build their problem-solving skills while doing this, right? And that's why we call this the problem, right? And so for this teen, it's I'm distracted when I start working on my homework, right? And so the solution is working at the dining room table with only the things I need. The EFs that we're targeting here are getting started and planning. And then we put a plan into place. So I'm going to start at 4 p.m. at the dining room table. I'm going to set an alarm to remind me, right? That's a great thing. I'm going to take a 10-minute break every 45 minutes, and I'm going to use an alarm to remind me to take a break and when my break is finished. And their reward is they get to look at their phone during their break, right? And they get some screen time when their homework is completed. We find a lot of teens are using screen time as a motivator, and that's fine. It's working with families to like, how do we make that manageable, but how do we pull them away? And how do we also use that as a carrot at times too? This is just like an example homework behavior contract. So, kind of similar, like what's your plan? When are you going to start? What are some things you might need to do to stay organized or understand what you need to do? There's lots of these out there. If you Google them, the Smart But Scattered book series also has some good ones. Some families will do something more like an expectations agreement. These are the things you need to do related to chores and homework, and maybe they get an allowance. Maybe that is the way that they earn screen time. Each time they meet one of these expectations, they earn screen time, for example. Okay, I'm going to go quickly through some of these. Visual supports is a big one. And so these can look really differently. These might look like a schedule, I think is oftentimes what a lot of people think of for visual supports. I would say that you can use, I thought these are some great ideas for things like you could put this one, the pink one, you could put this on the door that the teen's going to walk out of that says what they need to pack as a way to check, or post this, on the door before they walk out. And so it's really being mindful of, when you do a task analysis, do you need to have a visual support tied with it to help them remember to do this task? Even things like maybe you put a little Post-it on the dryer and washing machine settings they're going to use. You teach them how to do the task of laundry, how to actually do it, but visual supports can be tied in to really make it help them remember what parts they need to do or what the steps are. This could be done for things like bringing supplies to class. So maybe this is on their desk, or it's in their binder on their math folder or their geography folder. Here's a sample homework checklist that can be helpful, right? And so it's more visual, but you could see how this could eventually become just words only as they get older as well, if that's something they want to transition to, and clearly indicates what they have to do, what they earn, and did they do it. A planner is, I would argue, for many middle schoolers and high schools, is they're using it a visual support, right? And they're writing down their homework assignments. They can clearly see what needs to be done. We often talk with students about once you write your assignments down, and they often have planners that are sort of organized by subjects, you number them. What's the order they need to be done, and prioritize them. And you can prioritize them in like, this has to be done. You can also do things like, if you've got to do 4 homework assignments, you can do the one you hate first or the one you love first, right? Like there's some options there, and giving them that freedom to choose that. Things like, posting a calendar, having some sort of like Post-its for what is happening each day, maybe in the family schedule or after school, can be really helpful. Sometimes our teens will tell us like, I don't actually know like what goes on, after I get home from school. And so just even putting this up there can help with their planning skills, like checking that, hey, why don't you check what we have after school today? Anything we need, do you need to pack an extra snack in your lunchbox? Like, those are all building those good planning skills. And builds up to kind of maybe what our calendars might look like right now. So I want to also make mention of some visuals you can use more in school, like using a storyboard, for example, to understand or process materials. Storyboard That is a website that has a lot of pre-created storyboards, or that individuals can use to create storyboards. For even things like a plot diagram, the way a story might progress. And a lot of them, this is fun to create. Like a lot of our teens really like this. And then, making things like a plot diagram more visual too. If they're a visual learner and that comes across and sort of the visual supports they're using, this can be really helpful. Antecedent-based interventions is really just kind of a jargony way of saying, what can you do to modify the environment to make EF challenges sort of less challenging, right? And so I think homework space is a huge one. We talk about this a lot with, as soon as kids start doing homework, they do need a quiet space. Doing it at the kitchen table could actually be the worst spot, depending on what's going on in the kitchen. And so how do you create this? How do you modify the environment to decrease distractions, increase focus, increase ability to concentrate? And that might be things like, we set the microwave timer to go off 30 minutes after you start because you get a break. Breaks are important. Video modeling is a big one. I mentioned this above with organization, but this can be helpful. There's videos out there for absolutely everything. It's just kind of wild. But here's a, video one of our teens found for organizing your backpack. How do you pack your backpack? How do you do it effectively? A lot of teens like creating videos themselves, or, the child could film their parent doing it. So it's kind of a fun way to really teach, but it can be really motivating as a teaching method. Peer-mediated interventions. This could be a peer or sibling or friend models the behavior and provides instruction. This can be maybe more motivating, especially if it's an older sibling that can kind of talk through this. The Smart But Scattered books also have great information about setting up peer programs at school, in particular, if folks would be interested in this to kind of work on some EF challenges. Social narratives or social stories can be helpful to set the expectations about why we write homework down, why it's important, why you need to do that. And then briefly, technology is huge. I would say this is probably the strategy, especially for our high schoolers, that we're going towards more. The smart speaker, the Alexa smart speaker, is great. And we see families using this for things like having it be like the backup alarm to get up and get out of bed. You can set it consistently, reminding them like, hey, it's 6:50. It's almost time to walk out the door. Do you have your lunch? Do you have your water bottle? It can provide reminders like that. It's really got some cool capabilities. And it's verbal. And a lot of our teens say that they are overwhelmed by notifications on their phones, on their smartwatches. Those can be helpful too, but not if you're getting 50 a day. And so the smart speaker being, kind of really in your face because you hear it, if you're in that environment, can be really beneficial. So technology can be a really powerful one. And again, something they can use going forward. Okay. So my last couple minutes, what I will say is if you're going to put this all together, it's prioritizing what skill you want to target, what EF challenge, I'm thinking through these things. It's maybe thinking about developing a contract or some sort of agreement. That helps really clearly specify the goal, the expectations, what the reward is, tracking the behavior. How's it going? Are you meeting your reward? Do we need to add a strategy? Do we need to change something? And reevaluating it regularly. And so, for example, this might be an initial homework contract similar to the one I showed you earlier, where they're working on 2 things. So it can be really simple. You don't need a fancy contract or agreement. You want to incorporate evidence-based strategies, like some of the ones we just talked about. And then reevaluating the contract or the agreement. And that I would say on a weekly basis to start, maybe less frequently as things get going. And these are just the take-home messages that hopefully came across. But we just know that targeting these things, identifying them, understanding how to target them can really have a significant impact on well-being. And, you know, maybe executing it can be a future talk or something we think on, but I think that's sort of that next step. How do you put this into practice and work on that? And that's by making a really doable plan. And using those steps we just mentioned. There's my contact info if anyone has questions or wants to chat further. I think Sadie just put an evaluation in the chat. And I think we've got like a minute or two for questions if anyone has one, but hopefully that was helpful. I know that was a lot of information for kind of setting the stage about strategies to tackle these skills with the goal of, you know, decreasing their level of difficulty and challenge for the individual, but also improving well-being. All right. And thanks for your time and attention, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Amie. That was great. Always great to have you doing these trainings.
Good.
I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate all of you attending and your time as well. Like Amie said, I did put in the chat a form if you have a few minutes to complete that. We're just trying to, since we're just kind of piloting this RAC training series, we definitely want some feedback on what we can improve on. And I will follow up with an email with the recording of this training, and also, if it's okay, Amie, your slide deck, that would be great.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
I'll send out the slides. Absolutely.
Okay.
So great.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you.
Thank you, everyone.